ready to rock and roll.
A year,
where have we been?
A year off. It was a rough 2025. What's up?
Buried in data centers.
We will get to that. What's up, everybody? Corey Singletary with the Citizens Utility Board, with a long overdue episode of CUB Tracks, and alongside me, our executive director, as always,
Tom Content, Citizens Utility Board. Great to be back.
Yep. So it's been, as you've alluded to, it's been a busy past several months. We had some rate cases in 2025, but then we didn't really get to take a holiday break, did we?
The break was non-existent,
yes,
especially for the regulatory team.
Yeah, we had. We'll get to the fun timeline and whatnot, but as most people have probably seen in the press, if you're following, if you're coming back years and years and years later from the future, hopefully things turn out pretty well. But in 2025, the whole data center scene, just in the world, in the United States, sort of blew up. Discussion about growth of data centers, lots of new data centers, big data centers in around the United States, including in Wisconsin. Right?
Exactly.
And this started back in the year before, right, with the WEPCO rate case and some generation applications that we had.
Yep, we had new natural gas plants turned out to be linked to a certain Microsoft project.
Yeah. The certain Microsoft project, which eventually became publicly disclosed, and so, first was Microsoft, and then project, and most people are just calling the Port Washington data center project these days, but being developed by Cloverleaf for Oracle and OpenAI and Vantage.
Yep. Also known as Project Lighthouse. Yep. Since I drove by and saw the sign. So.
Yep. And so both of those projects, big, massive, right? Both
projects together would be like adding another 1.1 million customers to We Energies.
Yeah,
those customers used what, a 5.3 megawatts or 5,300 megawatts in the last year or so, and these two projects alone, guess what, 5,300. So.
Yep.
Took We Energies from 1896 till now to get to that, and then they could double the system in 5 to 10 years.
Yep,
it's orders of magnitude crazy.
I think that was how I put it when I got to speak testify in front of some legislators. It took us 100 years for WEPCO to get to the size that it is today, and in less than a decade, we're going to basically double the size of the WEPCO system. But what we wanted to talk about was essentially what sort of spilled out from these data center developments and everything that kind of came out of that, right?
Right.
So, in order to provide service to build these customers, that was the question. How are they going to be charged? How much are they going to pay? The data centers were making a lot of commitments going into this, right? In terms of what they were willing to do.
Yeah, they said they would pay their way for the assets needed to serve them, and We Energies said they were going to pay, that customers wouldn't be seeing increases because of this. And when I was asked about it in the press, I always said, well, they're saying all the right things. The devil's in the details, and then you guys dug in.
Yeah, and the details started dropping around the end of March last year. I went back and looked it up because it had been a while. WEPCO filed their application with the Public Service Commission, the utility regulator, for approval of a new rate structure, a new tariff that was going to be how these data centers, these very large customers, VLCs, as the terminology, I guess the acronym that WEPCO liked to use, VLCs, or the data centers, would be charged under, and they dropped that back in March, but not to be outdone. I don't know how much we'll get into the second one today, but a little over a month later, Alliant Energy filed an application for an individual contract for a data center in Beaver Dam, right?
That's right, and now those are the three data centers under construction and in Wisconsin at the moment. One of which, the first phase of Microsoft, is now open already. So the PSC had big decisions to make and two very different ideas and frameworks for how to go about this.
Yeah, and we thought that would be maybe helpful for folks, right, in terms of when we stepped into this is all new for Wisconsin, for us. It's actually arguably new for the utility industry around the country, right? Lots of states, lots of utilities are grappling with this issue, and we thought it would be helpful to maybe walk through not only the particulars of maybe the applications and what the utilities brought forward, but kind of how we looked at it and what the issues were. So from your perspective, what was like the most important one? And maybe you gave it away in terms of how you're talking about the data center's commitments. But when we stepped into this, what was, from your perspective, the most important issue as we looked at these rates?
From my perspective, it was just protecting customers from all the risks, because once the utility industry used to be stodgy and a more of a low risk enterprise, and once you get into the tech economy, there's a lot of more variability and volatility in that, and so the risks of an AI bubble, the risks of a whole wave of new power plants being built and customers potentially being on the hook for those were key for me.
And I think those last things you really mentioned are what makes these data centers come into town different from, say, a more traditional large load, like a new packaging plant or a new paper mill, large foundries, things like that, which are admittedly very large customers. But why it makes it so different in that by taking service from the utility, by coming to WEPCO's service territory, the amount of resources that triggers, right, in terms of new generation, transmission, some distribution, maybe even just at the utility side, billing, admin, customer support, everything. That jump in cost of new things the utility has to spend money on is much greater than that sort of traditional organic growth. And the way we set rates isn't really designed for those kinds of big step moves.
Yeah, the numbers still boggle my mind, even though I've been saying them out loud for a while. But just if you think of what We Energies' largest customer was until now, it's a big manufacturer. It doesn't use 100 megawatts; it uses less. But let's just say it was 100. It'd be like adding 18 of those in Racine County and putting 35 of them just north of Port Washington. 35 new of what's already the largest customer in one spot. So it is daunting. And so that's why the PSC commissioners, when they were describing these cases, said they're some of the most consequential cases they've taken up. And if you think about the stakes and the dollars and magnitude of dollars involved, I think, I can't pull all the old executive directors of CUB going back to 1979, but these were huge cases.
Yeah, and actually one thing, just to get a little wonky, that you had mentioned that also makes these different is it's one customer, right, in one place. It's not, even if it were 18 of those 100 megawatt customers, that would be 18 different customers with all of their different usage characteristics, with different business propositions, different business futures, prosperity, ups and downs, and things like that. Whereas this large amount of load, large amount of infrastructure spend is tied to, in the case of WEPCO, two customers, and then for Alliant with one, even though that one is relatively speaking smaller. And so it's all these things piled together that makes that sort of reveals some of the vulnerabilities in how we've traditionally done rates for the normal size of customer that we had. And so, as you alluded to, the two utilities took two different approaches, right, to tackling this problem of how do we make certain that everybody pays their fair share, that the data centers pay their full freight, as it were, on serving them.
Exactly.
And so I think we were just talking about this earlier, and I'm curious as to your thoughts. But I'm guessing there isn't a right answer. But I was asked a number of times when this issue started coming up, and there was all these data center announcements, and it's like, well, how would you design a rate? And for your first order question is, what is most important to you, right? Is it putting up a big wall, big firewall, big fire break that says, okay, whatever happens on the data center side of things, whatever new costs you have to spend money on, new investments you have to make, whatever new expenses you have to take on to serve these customers. Make certain they don't spill over to the other customers. Basically, try to de-risk that whole proposition as much as possible and keep everything on the data center that's on the data center side and the rest of the customers sort of over on the other side. So you don't let the money flow back and forth. The other way would be to be something closer to treating them like a normal utility customer, where they kind of go into the soup and the costs get spread around. And in that universe, the money does flow back and forth a little bit. And there's an opportunity for all those new sales to serve, you could spread maybe some existing costs that customers are currently paying for, other customers are currently paying for, and the data centers could maybe kick in a little bit because some of those costs would be spread out over the data center costs. But the money gets moved back and forth, and so now that is a riskier proposition from the perspective of other customers. And I didn't have a right answer then, and I don't know if I have a right answer now. And certainly, what we've seen from the utilities suggests that they don't have agreement on one right way. But I'm curious to your thoughts as we were going through that. How the importance of managing that balance between risk to existing customers and the potential for cost benefits, but also increases in cost to other customers.
Yeah, I mean, I think I personally came down on the side of let's reduce the risk, and knowing that there could be, we could see some benefits, could have potentially have seen some benefits. I'd love to see, action somehow result in prices actually going down at some point. We're always in this crazy trajectory of cost increases. But I thought, I'm of the mind that there's so much risk that's attendant to this AI wave that risk protection was foremost in my mind. And we're seeing the public get more animated about these issues because of what's been going on with data centers and energy prices in other parts of the country where those states deregulated their energy systems long ago, and so you're seeing more immediate impacts on prices. And so I think that's helped kind of create this fervor of interest that has really dramatically picked up just in the last 6 months.
Yeah, and I'm certainly some of that is informed. I tended to lean that direction as well.
On the risk versus reward.
On the risk versus reward.
Possible reward.
Yeah, and some of it might be a little bit of a sliding scale, right? Like the bigger the customer, the greater the cost risk associated if for some reason the sales don't show up, the business model for the customer changes and they don't need as much, or maybe they close a facility or something like that. And certainly the book isn't closed on this. We've sort of turned the page on the first chapter for Wisconsin, but that's real interesting. And I think you placing the potential impact of data centers coming to Wisconsin in the backdrop of the existing sort of cost pressures for customers, and it kind of feels like, well, costs seem to have been going up relentlessly, even without the data centers. Let's just try to make certain it doesn't get worse.
Right. And then just from the fairness aspect, these tech companies are not crying poverty anytime soon. So they certainly have the means, and they're certainly saying they're going to do this, do X. Let's just make sure they do that, right? And make sure they live up to the words that they've said out loud, that they've said when they signed a ratepayer protection pledge at the White House, that they've been committing to do the right thing. And so hopefully the decisions that we got are moving us in that direction.
So speaking of decisions, and we're talking about sort of different pathways, we'll start with maybe We Energies first, because that was the one that I think got the most press, impacts our Wisconsin's largest utility, right, and has the two largest projects, right? The two projects that combined are functionally going to basically double the size of We Energies' system. And so We Energies back in March of last year filed for approval of two tariffs We Energies likes to call it their customer protection plan. I don't know if they put a trademark on that, but that's if you ever see in the press We Energies talking about their customer protection plan, that's what it is. Is it was tied to this proposal, and they came in with that sort of let's sort of segregate the data centers, right? Let's really take a risk management approach, and one. I mean, do you think that pathway was chosen because how much was influenced by the particular data centers they were seeing, right? We'll get to it a little bit, perhaps a little bit later today, but Alliant, they had a couple 100-megawatt data center come to town and want to be served by them. Whereas even just from the first project from Microsoft, we were talking several hundred megawatts up to 1.82 gigawatts, somewhere in that range, right? Just for one. And then you had the Port Washington project, which is another like maybe 3 gigawatts. How much do you think that, and this is speculation, but how much of it do you think was influenced by the fact that they were facing these massive projects as opposed to something smaller, that they took this approach?
Yeah, I mean, I think they sense it's a higher risk opportunity, and what the tech companies around the country are all about right now is a need for speed, and so and We Energies negotiated with them, and they extracted the price for need for speed, which is a higher profit margin, which is one of the elements in the proposal of these tariffs, where those VLCs are going to pay 10.5 to 11% round numbers as a return for the resources that are built to serve them. Mm-hmm. And so I think higher risk, higher potential reward, that's the business opportunity that We Energies saw there.
And the other price that the data center customers are essentially functionally paying, not in cash money, but in obligations they're taking on, and is what kind of makes this proposal different, is it makes it so that these very large customers, these data centers, have to subscribe to sufficient bespoke resources. I'm going really slow because all of these are specific terms to these tariffs. So the VLCs have to subscribe to enough bespoke resources to supply all of their electricity service requirements. Essentially, Microsoft goes to We Energies and says, this is what we're going to build. This is what that sort of usage profile looks like. This is how much electricity we're going to need. We Energies goes back and they run it through the resource planning model and say, okay, well, in order to do that, we're going to need resources that look like X, Y, and Z, right? They work with the customer to figure out maybe they have some clean energy needs or they have other requirements or whatnot, and they come up with a portfolio of generation, essentially, power plants, to simplify it, that are needed to serve that one customer. And that becomes those bespoke resources that the customer would subscribe to. And then they are on the hook. This is that price I was talking about that they have to pay, essentially. They are on the hook for paying off those capital investments for the entire depreciable life of those assets, plus expenses. And so that was sort of the unique element that WEPCO brought to the table, was this requirement directly tying the large customer to the capital investment that says, well, you have to pay, for whatever energy you need and other things, but if we have to put steel in the ground for you, you're going to pay for that.
Right.
Not up front. Some places it's like, if we got to build something for you, it's cash money up front. But this is, you are contractually on the hook for 20 years or longer potentially to pay for these assets. That, to me, that was the most striking sort of differentiating factor between what we had maybe seen around the country in data center rates and what We Energies brought to the table. What was something else from your perspective that made the WEPCO proposal unique from the start?
Unique from the start, I think that you hit on the main one. I think that was something that we hadn't seen around the country, and we hadn't seen. there's been talk of exit fees and talk of termination charges or exit fees, but I think finding a way to actually tie the tech companies to the generation for the full number of years, because power plants, for those who don't know the jargon, they're paid off over 30, 40, 50 years, depending on the project. And so the concern was with around the country, I'm sure, and other places where you don't have this, is that customers are going to be on the hook afterward, or before the power plant's done, if something goes wrong with customer A in the tech business or customer B in the AI race.
Yeah. It's essentially we're making these multi-billion-dollar decisions now, and we're making them built on top of the expectation, the hope that the load we're building it for is there for the entire life of those new investments. But over 20, 30 years, right? Like, things change. I mean, 20, 30 years ago, we weren't even talking about some of these companies and their products, right?
Right.
Some of them literally didn't even exist. So I think particularly when tied with the pace of change in the tech industry, that was a concern.
The other thing that's unique to this one, I think, is the commitment to the Focus on Energy program, the statewide energy efficiency program. And not every state has a statewide program like this, but the tech companies and We Energies explicitly said that they were going to pay the full 1.2% of their sales toward the Focus program. And when you talk about 1.2% of sales, that's not much for a typical residential customer paying into Focus. But when you talk about something the size of a data center, that's real money. I think the PSC estimate was $20 to $25 million increase in the Focus program, which is it has been around $100 million a year, and this would be a $20 to $25 million bump, not right away, but over time from these two projects. So that's a pretty significant thing, and it's good to see that, because large energy customers have been enjoying a discount on what they pay into Focus, by and large across Wisconsin, and it's good to see that that valuable program is going to see an infusion of money.
Yeah, and I think We Energies being able to work with these developers to recognize that as part of that commitment for them to pay 100% of the cost that they cause. These data centers basically cause a cost in an increase in the contribution to Focus that the utility has to pay. That has to be recovered from customers, and unless it flows through, unless that bump that comes from the data center sales comes from the data centers, then it's just going to be passed on to other customers. So I was glad. I was also glad to see that they had kind of come to an agreement on that. We had to kind of finesse the language through the case. It was not 100% clear, when you got down to, specific terms and conditions in the tariff.
It might have needed a few belts and suspenders, but
yeah, I think the intent was there, though, which is good.
The intent was there from the beginning, which was good to see.
So rather than walk through every sort of gory detail in the case and gyration, there was one item that I think maybe made the rounds in the press, that there was a lot there. It was a big focus in the case, I think to a certain extent rightly so. But speaking with a few folks, I think it was something that maybe was a bit of a surprise that emerged as a big issue, and that was in the subscription model, right? That sort of bespoke resource subscription model. There was an option for these data centers to essentially not pay for 100%. They could say, well, we're only subscribing to this as a capacity resource, so like half of electricity, I'll say, right? Like meeting the peak demand days, but we're not subscribing to it for the energy, the actual electricity that we need day to day, but just the ability to meet those peak demands. And that part of the initial proposal would have shifted, and I'm giving it away a little bit, would have shifted some of the costs, some of those capital investment costs, the steel in the ground, to the non-VLC, the non-data center customers. And that got a lot of attention and a little bit of blowback.
Yeah, that became known as the 75-25 issue. because the way the math ended up working out, the tech companies on those capacity-only projects would be responsible for 75% of the capital costs, and the rest of the customer base would be responsible for 25%. And it's not like they have a program of almost of about $8 to $9 billion of capital that they're planning to spend on all these power plants, and it would have been 25% of like certain natural gas units, which we tallied up just 3 of those projects, and it was about $4 billion, and so a fourth of that is real money. It's $1 billion that other customers would have been on the hook for. So.
Yeah, and on top of that, because the data centers weren't subscribing to it for the energy, they would not pay for the fuel costs, which shifts not only just the dollar cost to the other customers who would be receiving the energy from those facilities, but also the risk associated with fluctuations in fuel costs over time.
That was a big issue, and we're one that we did get resolved.
Yeah. So to jump to the end on that one. So when the commission met, it looked at the record. There was a lot of discussion about that. There were some alternative pathways to kind of recognize, well, if the commission thought there was some merit in this concept directionally, how could you make it better? But I think the commission agreed with the position that CUB put into the record, as well as a few others, which is like, this is just overly complicated. Why are we doing this? Bespoke should be bespoke. If this is what's needed to supply you, then you should be paying for it. And so they just struck that from the final authorized program.
100% means 100%.
100% means 100%.
Seems so simple when you say it that way.
Yeah. Another one, and I'm curious as to your take on this. So the utility came in, and the proposal was originally designed for customers with a peak demand of 500 megawatts or larger, which, to something you had mentioned earlier, is more than 5 times the size of We Energies' current largest non-data center customer, because I think at this point we have to count Microsoft. So they're previously their largest customer, more than 5 times as big, and it wouldn't be even available to anyone above that. But there's a lot of room between, say, 50, 60, 70 megawatts and 500, and it's not like these capital costs and incremental costs and risk issues we've been talking about go away between those numbers. And the commission ultimately decided to take that threshold, bring it all the way down to 100, and to make it mandatory for customers above 100 megawatts. What do you think of that?
I mean, I think our commission benefited in some ways because other states have gone first in trying to figure out these issues. A lot of states, Wyoming dealt with this 10 years ago with its first data center, and other states have followed. Virginia's been doing it for a while too in Data Center Alley. But I think what we've seen is that a lot of other states have used 100 as the benchmark going forward. And what struck me by the end of the case was it became the amount of energy being used at the Beaver Dam project, which was a different utility, was 220. And I was thinking, if that were a We Energies customer, that would not be a VLC, right, under the original scenario, even under the compromise scenario that We Energies put forth. So I was glad to see it come down.
So that was probably another big change the commission made when it approved the final tariff. It extended the service agreements, the service agreements, not the bespoke resource obligations. Those stay for the life of the asset, but they extended the contracts from 10 to 15 years. I think that was just sort of directionally, we liked that longer sort of obligation. One other item that I don't know if I think We Energies certainly was aware that it was something that that a number of groups were going to be concerned about. We'd expressed concerns about it when they sort of walked us through the proposal initially, and that was transmission costs.
Oh yeah.
And I think in addition to all data centers and all these generation projects that people are seeing pop up around the state, I think the projects that like companies like ATC and others are constructing around the state are also drawing some attention. I'm curious from your perspective, the sort of non-rate analyst wonky perspective, like how would you describe to people what that issue was, or what that issue actually honestly still is with the transmission costs and these big customers?
Well, I'm just tallying up. ATC has seen huge growth opportunities from data center connected power lines that wouldn't be built but for data centers. So, and we're not talking about the regional network projects that are coming in for the whole benefit of the whole MISO region. This is just for these two data centers. There are 4 lines and about for these two data centers, it's 3 lines and about $2 billion. And then for the Alliant Beaver Dam project, there's another $200 million ATC line. And the way ATC's rates are set up, it wasn't going to be assigned directly to the data center customer because ATC costs are typically spread across the footprint. So that means customers in Madison, customers in Green Bay, customers of up in Marquette, Michigan, are going to pay a share of all these costs unless and until ATC actually makes a change out in Washington, because its rates are set out in Washington. And I think there's a fundamental, without being you don't have to be wonky to see a fairness problem here. I've talked to our board member, Rob Coles, the former senator, and he's like, well, everybody in Green Bay has to pay for this, for something that isn't even involving public service, the public service utility. And that's the way it stands. That's the way it stands as proposed still. There seems to be movement toward a fix. The fix was announced in a different case, in the 2027-28 rate case, where We Energies indicated that ATC was planning to make a filing. We haven't seen that yet, so we're still calling on ATC to follow through with that.
Yeah, and there's sort of I guess there's 3 layers to this.
There are many layers. Yes.
So the first layer are the costs from these data center only investments flowing to the right utility? Because if you're talking about ATC, for example,
right.
ATC serves multiple distribution utilities: We Energies, Wisconsin Public Service Corporation, Alliant Energy, MG&E, and others. And the way that the pie, essentially the bill, is split for those costs, it is spread out on the footprint on a load ratio share basis, basically based off of peak demand of each utility, and that's built up from all the customers of each one of the utilities. And so there's that part. Are the costs flowing to the right utility? And then whatever costs go to that utility that are associated with data centers are the rates that our commission, the Wisconsin Commission, regulates. Are they flowing through those costs to the data centers who are causing these large incremental costs? But this also applies, admittedly, to all other classes. It's just, I think, as we've talked about, there's a lot of issues in the utility industry that the data centers kind of like, by being so large, they put a huge spotlight on it because they reveal some of these vulnerabilities. So those are the first 2 ones that are obvious. And the third one is, unfortunately, the fourth dimension, is time. And that, ATC is going out and building these lines and building these new substations in anticipation of the data center coming online in 2-3 years or whatever the case might be. And as soon as they're placed into service, they get to start recovering those costs from customers, but the data center hasn't ramped up to their full load associated with all that new incremental spend. And so the way, that sort of math flows in terms of how the money goes from ATC and gets split to the utilities and then the utilities to the customer is until the customer gets to full ramp, gets to full load, all ATC utilities and all customers served by all those ATC served utilities.
That's you, Marquette, Michigan, and everybody else.
Yeah, are paying for a part of that, and even once that sort of ramp is addressed, it's not clear that it 100% aligns, and then we still have to deal with the retail problem. So it was very thorny. And then you mentioned Washington. So there's this wrinkle that the rates that ATC has are regulated by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission,
Correct.
not state commissions. So how do you think our commission did on managing that? Who can pull what levers and dealing with this problem?
I mean, I think they sent a clear message that they want this fixed. We Energies' parent company is the majority owner of ATC, and so they have the wherewithal to make this change happen. And I think they sent that message pretty clearly. And I think the risk to customers is such that the PSC does regulate the costs that flow through to retail customers, including on the transmission costs, and that's kind of the point that our general counsel Daniel Narvey made in the briefs was, you have to, in order to enact these tariffs, the PSC had to show that there was no harm coming to other customers. And there was harm coming to other customers on the transmission line item. And so I think they did what they could as far as setting up a mechanism to kind of account for that for We Energies customers, but then they just kind of used the bully pulpit to say, ATC better work to fix this. We Energies should work with ATC to fix this. Yeah. So.
Well, We Energies, to its credit, had committed to working with ATC to do that, and the commission basically ordered or is going to be requiring them to follow through with that commitment. Right. And we'll get to it probably in a future episode, but we're starting to see some trickling elements of what maybe that fix might look like in the rate application. The rate increase application that We Energies filed with the commission about a month ago. And then, there were a litany of sort of cats and dogs issues that were really focused on tightening up, the terms and really trying to keep to that idea of, the data centers are causing certain costs and that they should be, they should pay those. One other one that maybe gets a little bit in the weeds, but it gets to this issue of risk, is financial security, right?
Yes.
And there were certain provisions in the proposed rate structure where, in certain circumstances, a customer taking service under this rate would have to provide, a financial security instrument up front. To simplify it, overly simplify it, basically has got to be, sort of cash money.
Some kind of collateral, yeah.
Yeah, some sort of collateral, something that We Energies could eventually take to the bank. But on the other hand, depending on circumstances, it could just be, hey, based on credit ratings or other things, essentially it would be the customer saying, hey, we're good for it, right? And we had some testimony on that, and I think that was probably the one thing of all the issues that we testified on that we thought were really important, where we thought maybe the commission could have gone a little further, but I'm curious as to your take on how that one resolved itself.
Yeah, this is what I called the show me the money part of our testimony, where Steve Keim, our chief economist, basically pushed for bigger and stronger financial protections, in part because of concerns about the technology industry and the AI bubble. And so they did end up making changes to ensure that the credit ratings of the data center companies meet standards that are consistent with our requirements that are being imposed in other states. One of the comments that from the utility during the public dialogue was that they thought they'd come up with a gold standard, and yet they hadn't even in this area they hadn't even done as well as a few other three other Midwestern states that we rattled off in our testimony. So I think it was an improvement, but when big dollars like this are involved, I still think there is a room for wanting more collateral and or upfront money.
I mean, in an ideal world, if, again, going back to the initial point of like where on that spectrum you're shooting for
Right.
on how you address this issue. If you are in the risk mitigation, let's protect other customers. The closer you can get to, you're above a certain size, you just got to pay for this stuff up front, right?
Right.
The capital investment, the stuff where there is a stranded asset cost shift risk. And I think, I've heard that there are some utilities that, maybe not for everything, but for some things, maybe like transmission, are saying, you got to pay for that up front. So,
Right.
like I mentioned, I think this is sort of the first chapter that we're seeing here on this.
Right.
Any other items that you think are, really stood out? Any other issues? Any things the commission did on this case that you think are particularly noteworthy that jump out to you?
I mean, I think we had testimony from Jeff Adams, our utility analyst, who talked about the reliability concerns of large load. He talked about the focus issue as well, but the reliability concerns, and there's actually been some articles just in recent weeks in the trade press, Utility Dive, and elsewhere, where you have this much energy in one spot. There's a reliability risk to the broader grid, or to the grid right around that, if it trips offline. And so there's national attention on this through the national NERC, the National Electricity Reliability Corporation. But it was good. I think it was a good flag, because not everything is about cost. We're concerned about, at CUB we are concerned about affordability, and affordability is job one. But that doesn't mean reliability is not important, because it is.
Well, we talk a lot about affordability, but for us, I think the reason we talk a lot about affordability is because for us, reliability and safety are sort of non-negotiables. Like those have to happen. They have to happen. And so I did find that discussion that Jeff kicked off really interesting, because it was highlighting both. It was highlighting both the fact that it wasn't really discussed in terms of whether or not these are the kinds of things the utilities is thinking about as it's going through this sort of bespoke resource conversation.
Right.
But it also circles back to costs too, because if it's not part of the bundle of costs that we're looking at and assigning to data centers, but if the utilities don't have to invest in sort of these additional reliability measures, but for the data centers, there could potentially be a hole there.
Right. And then the other one was, so we talked about Steve's and Jeff's testimony. The other thing that struck me was from what you proposed, which was to simplify many pages of your testimony. I would call it "Show me the math." And you on a few different occasions and over many pages said, "Show us the math. Please show us the math." And then you reiterated that, and so at least, even if they didn't show the math in this case, which I don't think they ultimately did,
No.
they will have to, and there will be, instead of it being set and forget, there's kind of a course correction clause that you came up with.
Yeah. So the exact wording and structure is a little different between the two data center cases for the two utilities, but that was an issue. And admittedly, this is not a We Energies specific problem. This is not specific to really any one of our utilities. And I'm guessing it's not just a Wisconsin problem. Is in utility regulation, the utility holds more or less all the power insofar as information is concerned, right? Like they hold all the data, they have all the information, and in their interest, that it is in their interest to not necessarily reveal everything all the time.
Well, you're not suggesting there's asymmetry.
There is information asymmetry, and I think I had commented to a number of folks along the way that there were a number of issues within this case, as well as the other, that would have been much simpler. That would have it's not to say that we wouldn't have had disagreements, but at least we would have been having a different type of conversation if there had been perhaps a little more work done on the front side, or even upon request. When the utility says, we're going to we're going to slice the pie a certain way. We're going to split cost a certain way. And those of us in the industry know it's never as simple as just saying that. There's a lot of accounting and things like that. And, if you could just show us how you're going to do it, even if it's not a real live set of numbers, just something indicative, that would have, and there were about at least 2 or 3 different places where it just would have been so much simpler if they had just kind of showed us how they were going to do it. And
here's what the system looks like today. Here's what it's going to look like 10 years from now, with and without these projects.
Yeah, and even if they're just sort of hypothetical numbers, at least the mathematics we can kind of check and see how that flows. But I'm glad you brought that up, because that is admittedly something that kind of grinds my gears generally, in that there are a number of times where all of our lives would be easier if the utilities did a little bit better homework on the front end. Any last thoughts on the Webco case? Did we want to talk about Alliant at all? A couple minutes there.
We should.
All right. So I think, in my mind, where someone had asked me a couple days ago, where, based off of the commission's decision, where is this issue? Right? Where does this tariff, where does this rate stand? And the way I described it is, the commission made its decision. We were generally happy with a lot of the decisions they made. There were some things down in the weeds where we didn't get exactly what we wanted, but we think as a whole it is a good outcome.
Yes.
And where we've moved to now we've moved to the verification and implementation stage. As you alluded to, the utility will have to provide more information in future filings. And so now we're down into the gory, in the mud, sort of making certain that when these costs start to flow through the utilities system and through the utilities books, that everything works the way that we think it's supposed to work, or at least the way it was described in this case.
Right.
So we've moved on to the implementation and verification phase, and so that's why this is not closed book.
It's not set and forget, and it's not by no means a done issue from a perspective of CUB, because it's going to be part of the bread and butter of every rate case for any utility that has a data center, but a data center in their service territory. But I think the combined effect of both the We Energies decision and the Alliant decision is that every utility is on notice that you got to file a tariff that's going to cover your whole system. So stealing the thunder on the Alliant one.
Yeah, so
get right into it.
Let's jump there. So in May 6th of 25, so like I said, about a month and change after Webco filed their application last year, Alliant Energy requested approval of a contract, an individual bilateral contract between Alliant and a data center developer that at the time was super confidential, and now we know is linked to Meta.
Yes.
As a company. And that was not a tariff, or the term that I like to use, because I think it's a little more descriptive but uses more words, which tends to be my style anyway, is a standard offer tariff, like something like it's a item on the menu of the utilities books that a customer can pick from, or the customer can walk up and say, okay, I know what I'm going to be charged.
A pricing plan for huge customers.
Yes.
That's standardized across the system.
Standard for all large customers of a certain size. Okay, so they came in not with a tariff proposal, standard offer tariff proposal like Webco did, but for an individual contract rate, and that was mirrored off of a structure they had developed over in Iowa.
Right.
Use this individual contract rate, or ICR structure, that they had negotiated in a settlement agreement a few years prior, and in retrospect, kind of, I guess we can probably laugh at it. The company's probably not particularly wild about it, but they had come in, dropped an application on May 6th, and said, "Hey, can we have a decision in 90 days?"
Yeah, by July.
Yes. And so this was
I guess we should have said July of what year, but it's bad joke.
90 plus something.
Yeah.
So the project was smaller, as I had mentioned before. It was about a 220 megawatt project, somewhere in that ballpark. At least that's what's expected in Beaver Dam. And again, going back to that sort of spectrum of how you solve for this problem of charging data centers for the utility service, Alliant went more the other way. They said, okay, we're just going to kind of mix them in. The term that I had used, which I didn't come up with, is more of a slice of system. Like the data center customer is just using a slice of the entire utility system, and they're kind of in the mix and in the soup. There wasn't anything like what We Energies proposed, which again is a different way to solve the problem, which is that they didn't have any kind of bespoke resource or capital cost obligations or anything like that. They did have more of what you talked about that we've seen in other states, like early termination fees, minimum billing requirements, things of that nature. A lot of costs tied directly to the regional energy market, and that type of thing. And initial contract term, not that dissimilar from what WEPCode initially proposed on a 10-year with some extension opportunities. And so we had seen the Alliant application drop a month before, started to dig into it, and then Alliant brought their proposal forward. What was sort of your immediate reaction when you saw the difference between the two?
Well, as someone who doesn't really look at all the confidential filings, it was a lot of blacked out pages, because you guys, the analysts on the staff and the general counsel are digging into what's behind that, what's under the surface, and but as somebody who's out there talking to the media, it's like I don't want to know some of that confidential stuff until it's made public, because I don't want to get caught saying the wrong things out loud in the public world. But it was surprising how much what the difference was in terms of how much had to be redacted in that case, and that ended up becoming a big issue and the subject of a lawsuit from Midwest Environmental Advocates that in turn likely led to some rounds of increased transparency by the time we got to the end of the process. So.
You had mentioned, and so jumping around a little bit, that's not actually the direction that I thought you'd take, but that was something that did make the press quite a bit. To your point,
it did.
Was the issue of confidential treatment, and you had mentioned the commission kind of sent some signals when it approved these rates or took its final action on these rates, and one that certainly wasn't memorialized, but I think we both hope is a signal, is that the days of, heavy redaction of information when there isn't a clear, very good reason why it cannot be public information for a, regulated utility, hopefully is done. Things like critical infrastructure information, sensitive market auction information, like when certain generators are running and not, and that, like, totally understand, right? Like there's some critical information that can't, for even just safety reasons, be disclosed. But there were whole sections, there were whole concepts within the contract that Alliant brought forward that were redacted, and they were issues that parties disagreed on, which meant that the commission was going to have to try to address an issue that was confidential in its entirety, and adjudicate between 2 or 3 or 4 different positions on that one issue.
At a time when the public is much more engaged on data centers and affordability than they were even 6 months or a year ago, for them to have to actually have ended up going into closed session to decide some of that case was just a bridge too far. And what surprised me about the whole thing was that the PSC counsel's office over a year ago in March of 2025, sent a signal, a clear message to all the lawyers in the utilities section of the bar that confidentiality requests are going to be looked at more closely going forward. And that was in March in 2025. And in November, I wrote a column for the Freedom of Information Council that talked about the need for more transparency. But it was, and that involved, some of the the things that were redacted by Microsoft, by the city of Racine, which had to get sued over by MEA over the water use of the data center at Microsoft, and some things that were confidential on a local level in Port Washington. But it's just surprising that the people weren't reading the room in terms of how engaged the public was getting.
So the issue, so that was an interesting one, and we can maybe get into the broader topic of transparency, as it relates to the public space and really how much the public should be able to access when it comes to things in the utility regulation space. So, you had talked about the show me the math.
Right.
Right. And I think that the Alliant, this contract was it was to a certain extent much clearer that if the utility perhaps had shown some math as to how the dollars were going to move around and as part of this slice of system construct,
Sure.
and result in, at the end of the day, no harm to other customers, that this might have been at least simpler, right? Where we wouldn't be talking so much about hypotheticals, and we could have been talking about specifics.
Right.
And that was sort of, from my end, that was the part that was really frustrating, because it's like, I'm not saying the way you're proposing to treat data centers, Alliant, is inherently bad, but it comes down to sort of the devil's in the details, and we need the details.
Right.
And
since
there were no details.
Since I joined this place in 2017 and hired you, and we built out a team here, follow the data has been the philosophy. And so, but in order to follow the data, you have to be able to see the data and review the data. So, because the data will lead us to our decision. We're not going to come in with a predetermined position on a case until we've seen the map.
So, we went through the We Energies case, and so there were the transparency issues. There's this issue of how can we really be sure, since we are sort of mixing things here, that customers aren't harmed. And from my perspective, the big win is really getting the commission to embrace and memorialize the fact that this isn't a set it and forget it. Because oftentimes, and I'm curious to your thoughts on this, when we have these sort of individual customer contracts, these market-based contracts that the commission approves, they tend to be set it and forget it, and I think largely it's because of the forget it part. They get approved in a case, and then they just disappear into everything else.
And the PSC is a busy place, and they've got something coming up on the agenda next week, and then the week after that, and there's a lot going on. So it's easy to kind of not go back and look and think, oh yeah, should we review how that's going? But it's good that mechanisms are in place for that.
Yeah. So the specific item that we got in this case, right, there was a lot of disagreement about, well, like maybe backing up. So maybe one of the central disagreement points is Alliant came in and said, well, we don't have to worry about all the stuff you're dealing with We Energies because we have enough resources right now, sufficient resources right now to serve this data center without having to spend any more money on anything.
Right. They don't need to build new stuff.
Correct. Which we didn't really dig into in the case. No one really seems to take issue with We Energies' assertion there. But
Alliance assertion.
Sorry, Alliance assertion there.
Yep. And they had just opened, a new gas plant in Riverside a few years, a little while ago now, but 6-7 years ago, and they'd lost the GM plant and the Lear plant and all the suppliers in Janesville. So we knew that they had a lot of supply. They've delayed some of the coal plant retirements, in part to attract economic development.
Built a whole bunch of solar.
Data centers, and built a whole bunch of solar, over a gigawatt of solar. So we knew they've been aggressive on the supply side and had some challenges on the demand side.
Yeah. So let's say so a lot of folks were like, all right, we'll take that, we'll take you on your word there, essentially. But over this 10, maybe 15, 20-year life of this contract, right, it is likely not the case that you are not going to either have to make investments because of this customer, or you wouldn't be making essentially that but-for issue,
Yep.
right? That there wouldn't be costs that but for this customer you wouldn't be making or making at that time. Like some things might have to be brought forward because this data center is soaking up some of that excess capacity, that spare capacity. And so, what I had proposed was, hey, the utility has sort of tacitly acknowledged that could happen. This is a concern of ours. Commission, just so we're clear, so we don't have a set it and forget it situation, let's establish a reporting requirement for the utility in future cases where they have to test. They have to do a test for these incremental costs, and that we memorialize that those incremental costs can be flowed through to the data center, to this Meta subsidiary data center, through a rate. We'll set it at zero because right now there's nothing incremental. But what if we ever find that there are, we've put a placeholder and we can do that. And the utility, for some reason, was super opposed to that concept. I think partially because they wanted to have this be a set it and forget it.
Right.
But for me, on the rate analyst side of things, I thought that was a pretty big win because then we have a structure. We can go back. We can course correct if something doesn't pan out the way that we had planned.
Exactly. That was a key one.
What else about, so it's a little bit murkier on this one because we're going to have to really dig into every rate case for Alliant.
Yep.
What were some other, big, important decisions or sort of outcomes from this case from your perspective that we haven't already talked about in terms of?
Yeah, I think it was on the financial protections that Steve Keim was testifying on. They did require that Meta be the financial backstop to this LLC, Dega, that's actually the one with the data center contract. So that was an improvement. I think one of the commissioners would have gone a little further in both cases on financial protections, but we're happy. We got some of what we wanted there, so that was good. They were concerned about the transmission cost again. It's consistent with the We Energies case, and want to watch that closely. And then Focus on Energy, same thing. They're going to pay their full freight into Focus, and those are some of the key ones.
Yeah. So it's the big thing. I think the commission signaled this as well from their perspective. And we are admittedly kind of we ride in a similar lane. These cases were not about the future of data centers as an industry in Wisconsin, right? These were more about if the policy environment decided by our legislature downtown allows for or is conducive to data center industry.
Which it is. We are conducive as of the tax break passed in 2023.
At this moment, and we are open for business, as it were, for data centers. It was really a question of how do we make certain that when these large system-altering customers come to town, that they are paying their fair share. Right?
Exactly.
And so I think that is, I wanted to throw that out there because this is a very charged issue, and none of what we were fighting or working on in the case was really talking about that issue. It was more about that sort of, who's paying for what.
Right. And as far as they made those changes to the contract, but then they sent a clear message, come back with a standard offer for all future data center projects. And that was kind of the biggest win and the biggest decision out of that case.
Mm-hmm. So we, and that was something we asked for, and we made more work for ourselves, but I think in the end it'll work out. All right. So, like I said, page turned on this chapter, not the end of this story. And then I alluded to it earlier, we've got some rate applications that we're going to have to talk about here in a little bit.
Yeah, the bread and butter of trying to deal with energy inflation is around the corner. So back to that, but I saw today that Microsoft intervened in the rate case, so we're going to be there for the homeowners, renters, and small businesses. So.
Well, I thought hopefully this was interesting to folks. We're going to try to get back in the saddle on a regular cadence for the podcast. There's certainly never a dearth of things to talk about. So thanks for listening in. Make certain to share, like, subscribe, all those fun things.
Yeah, and we'll have this in the show notes, but check out our data centers news page and our active cases page for updates on all those issues.
And that active cases page gets updated all the time anyway.
As often as we can.
As often as we can remember
but
that there's
it's got the 2 new rate cases on there, and so that's we updated in April after the April filing. So we're off and running on a new year of rate cases. So that's a place to go see what We Energies and WPS are asking for before we talk about it next time around.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you, Tom.
Thank you.
All right. And we'll catch you all in the next one. Thanks.